remember it to this day. I had no idea what to order. And I ended up going for a calzone. But I was surprised, actually. It was quite spicy and quite hot. And I was really, I must have been like red in the face. Yeah. But I persevered and I ate it. And yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Welcome to the What's for Dinner show, a podcast for people who put food at the centre of life. My name is Lynn, and my aim is to explore, along with my guests, how our food experiences shape our lives as well as our waistlines.
Oh, my go-to dish was chicken curry, and that used to meet with some raised eyebrows by my parents. My mum would come back with vanilla slices. Yeah, fantastic. Because there was a brilliant cake shop next to the church. It was a real treat, yeah.
Hey, so this is my first ever episode and my guest is, well, it's my husband Michael. He's kindly volunteered to be my guinea pig interviewee. He'll be remembering the culinary pleasures of growing up in Ireland in the 1970s and also telling me why, if he could, he'd choose to be a boiled egg. So let's get started. Tell me a little bit about what dinner time was like at home when you were growing up.
Okay, well, I grew up in 1970s Ireland, so Ireland back then wasn't renowned for its culinary delights. 70s Ireland was very different to the world we now live in, and it was perfectly safe to go out and kick a football around, lots of kids around.
So when you came home then, what would have been on the dinner table?
Yeah, it's, again, very traditional. It would be generally potatoes, yeah.
You're joking.
What? It's Ireland in the 1970s, of course.
Potatoes and...
there would be some peas maybe and maybe a pork chop. Interestingly, we didn't have loads of vegetables, really. We didn't eat lots of vegetables. The vegetables that we did eat would have been kind of carrot, turnip, peas. I never forget, it was a very funny moment in our household when my dad complained that he had pork chop, mashed potato and gravy, and there was no vegetables. And my mum answered, well, of course there's vegetables. You've got onion in there as well. Yeah. And that became an item of legend, really.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're talking about a time where in Ireland and probably, in the UK as well, we didn't have red peppers and avocados and
absolutely.
asparagus spears and tender stem broccoli.
Yeah. So, that's right. And, on a Sunday we'd have chicken, we'd have roast potatoes, we'd have gravy, we'd have peas and we'd have carrots. And that was pretty much what we had every Sunday. Never have dessert in the week. It was a lunchtime meal we had. And in the evening we would just have, something lighter. So we always ate a proper meal at lunchtime.
So that's during the week as well as at the weekends?
Yes, always.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And, I remember when, my brother, for instance, and his wife flipped that, to having their main meal in the evening. That was a really, quite a strange thing for us to see and behold, really, because it was such a ritual for us to have that main meal at lunchtime and then a lighter meal in the evening.
When you were going to school then, when you were going to secondary school or even primary school, you would come home for your lunch then, would you?
Yes, every day. Even when I went to college, when I was 17, I would walk home for lunch.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Gosh. And was that an unusual thing or did most of your pals do the same?
I would say the guys that live, within kind of hitting distance of the college even then would go home, yeah. And even at school, walk home with kids that lived in the, we would probably live maybe 15-minute walk from school and we would walk back and, we would have our lunch. Obviously, there was a whole bunch of kids that wouldn't be able to go because they'd travel in by bus or whatever and they would have lunch. But there wasn't a meal service at the school, yeah.
Oh, okay. So there wasn't a kitchen or a canteen, dining hall that you could go and have lunch?
No. There was when I went to college later, there was one. But even then, I could probably count on one hand the number of times that I ate a meal there.
Gosh, That's quite unusual, I think. I mean, that doesn't resonate with me at all, having grown up in England during the same period.
Yeah. So I suppose it was quite surprising for me to find that people, ate in different ways.
So how old were you then when your sister-in-law, I presume, decided to rock the boat and switch to having her main meal, or for the family having a main meal in the evening?
I probably would have been about 10.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it didn't change any habits in your in your house.
No.
Okay.
No. It was still quite an imported concept, I think, at that point.
Imported from where? From the UK.
Yeah.
So when you sat down for your lunchtime meal, would it be the three of you? You, your mum, and your dad?
Yes.
Okay, so your dad came home from work then as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And how would you describe your mum's cooking?
Pretty basic, we didn't have loads of money, so my mum was working to a tight budget, but she went out and she, got value for money from what she was purchasing. I didn't feel as if we were ever left short. So, we would have, it was meat and 2 veg, meat and 1 veg maybe. Yeah.
No puddings in the week, so a special treat at the weekends.
Yeah.
So what was the go-to pudding for a Sunday lunch?
The one thing that really sticks in my mind most of all is, because again, I was picky even with puddings at that point. So my mum used to make a trifle, and with jelly, and custard and so on. And I didn't like jelly, so I wouldn't eat the trifle, But my mum and dad would go to church every Sunday. My mum would come back with vanilla slices because there was fantastic. Because there was a brilliant cake shop next to the church. That was a real treat, absolute heaven.
So your mum and dad were having the trifle, and you were having a vanilla slice. So the bakery was open on Sunday then after church?
Yeah.
Okay, I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah.
So your family go-to meals then, as you say, meat, 2 veg, if you count potato as a veg, peas, gravy, and a fairly traditional pudding after.
And I'm trying to think, what else we might have had, fish fingers, and we never had anything spicy until I left home.
Right.
Well, actually, I'll tell a lie. I started to go and get a takeaway Chinese probably when I was maybe 16, 17 from the one and only Chinese that was in Waterford at the time.
And what was the Chinese choice off the menu?
Oh, my go-to dish was chicken curry, which was beautiful. Even now I really love a fairly simple Chinese chicken curry. The sauce is just great. Really is.
Yeah, sort of yellowy.
Yeah, classic.
Sauce. Yeah, I think I remember having that Chinese chicken curry.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, and that used to meet with some raised eyebrows by my parents. Yeah.
So they never had it.
No.
So what about fish and chips? Was that a thing in Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very rare occasions I would remember my dad bringing back maybe fish and chips if he'd been, out for a couple of drinks or whatever. But again, it wasn't really something that we did. We didn't really do takeaway.
No.
Everything was, cooked at home.
Yeah, home cooked.
We would sometimes, myself and my dad would go fishing, so we would catch mackerel, and we would bring them home and cook them. Likewise, if we went to the beach for the day, we would get on the rocks and we'd pick dillisk, which is basically seaweed, which we would then dry in the back garden. And also we would have had periwinkles, which we would collect, and we'd boil them up and eat them.
Oh, okay. So foraging, as they call it nowadays.
Yeah. So we did that. But takeaways, it's not something that was on my radar really at all. One of the things actually, which was very odd about me when I was growing up, is I would never eat bread and butter. I just wouldn't eat it. Which one of the things that I love now, of course, yeah. But maybe, I like to think it's because I obviously had a taste for quality bread and butter, as opposed to sliced white, which didn't appeal to me.
So you're definitely more of the artisan sourdough kind of guy.
Yeah,
now,
I was
then.
never absolutely. And the other thing that I would never eat, I was quite a picky eater actually. When I reflect back, I would never eat beans. So baked beans, for instance, I wouldn't touch them. Whereas now I love a baked bean. Yeah.
And what about snack foods? Were they a big thing in your childhood?
I was an absolute sweet obsessive. So yeah, I had a real, sweet tooth, if not for desserts, but for actual sweets. So back then we would always have the shop down the road that would serve, the classic quarter ounce of sweets
in a jar from a jar,
and there would be a whole range of jars. So I would be regularly heading to the sweet shop to get my quarter ounce of sweets. My favourites were American hard gums.
Oh yes, and did you get them in a little paper bag?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
We used to do that. That's fantastic.
I love them. And wine gums, they were my go-to.
Oh, okay, so chewy sweets.
Yeah, I love them.
I wonder how much 4 ounces of American hard gums were back in 1970.
4 ounces.
Or something.
I didn't pay an awful lot.
No,
It's probably
pennies.
7 pence. That's kind of comes to mind, something like that. But yeah, pennies. I'd get a taste for them, and
be obsessed.
Yeah.
I used to like Tom Thumbs. Did you ever have those?
No, they
little
weren't.
Tiny pips.
Yeah, no, they weren't really the thing for me. I used to like lemon sherbets.
Cola cubes.
Cola cubes, they were good. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I can remember my best friend at the time. There was a shop like that, sort of about a 10-minute walk from her house.
Right.
And we used to go regularly, and they'd weigh them out on the scales and then slide them into a paper bag from a sort of a
exactly. That's
That's
That's exactly what would happen. I was a big fan of those. My first trip abroad was to France as part of a school trip, and that obviously gave me a little bit of a sense of that things could be different.
Yeah. So what kind of things did you eat in France? Was this in a hotel or hostel?
It was more of a hostel.
Yeah.
And you can imagine a whole group of teenage boys. There was lots of rumours about what the meat actually was, whether it was horse or whatever. I suppose the next kind of trip that I did abroad was to Luxembourg. I did a 6-week student exchange when I was, how old would I have been? Probably 19.
Okay, so when you were at college.
Yeah, when I was at college. Yeah. That was interesting because then I would eat in the evening. It was myself and another guy. We stayed with a lady, who kind of, obviously it was a bit like, I suppose, it was a bit of like a homestay, I suppose, where we stayed with her.
So you moved into her spare room kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And she would cook for us in the evening. She kind of took us under her wing and kind of brought us out with her friends and family. I remember the first meal out that we went with them was to a restaurant in Luxembourg City, and it was a pizzeria. It's the first time I'd ever been in a pizzeria.
Right, okay.
There's no such thing as a pizzeria in Ireland.
No, right, okay. So you'd never had pizza before?
I'd never had pizza.
Had you been out to restaurants before when you were in Ireland?
I wouldn't say restaurants. I'd perhaps been to, pub.
Yeah,
club,
pub
type,
or hotel or whatever.
Yeah, that type of thing.
Wow, so a pizzeria in Luxembourg, that's quite exotic.
That was like, I was really living the dream then. And I remember it to this day. I had no idea what to order. And I ended up going for a calzone, which was pretty out there really for your first choice. So I obviously had a bit of something about me in terms of going for something a little bit different.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries.
Yeah. But I was surprised, actually. It was quite spicy and quite hot. And I was really, I must have been like red in the face. Yeah. But I persevered and I ate it. And yeah, it was great.
So what about Christmas? Is Christmas a big thing in your house?
We weren't big on turkey. Even now I hear my mother's voice ringing in my ears saying, find turkey too dry. Yeah. So what we would have is a big chicken, but also my mum would cook a ham. So and the ham was fantastic. I was a big fan of the ham.
So a whole piece of ham and a large chicken.
That
And was there any more vegetable variety on Christmas Day? Or were you...
there was obviously Brussels sprouts, and there would have been peas, carrots. That was probably, I don't remember any other, variation on that really.
And was Christmas a fun time at home, or was it, particularly religious time?
I wouldn't say it was particularly religious. My mum was probably the most religious in the house. I think my dad less so, although, he obviously did what he needed to do, church going. So, it was nice actually, because my mum in particular came from quite an extended family. So on Christmas morning and she was the eldest. So on Christmas morning, it was always a great tradition that all of her brothers and sisters would come to our house, and they'd just have a drink, say hello on Christmas morning. And it was really nice, actually. We weren't, it was probably an economic thing as well. We weren't huge on presents and that sort of thing. It was more that social, come in, have a drink, a bit of a catch up, and then they'd go their own way, and they'd have Christmas Day with their families. Because it for that couple of hours on Christmas morning, it felt like a real, social hub.
Yeah. So your mum was the oldest.
Yeah.
Okay. So they all the brothers and sisters.
They all came.
Yeah. So how many were there?
There was 11 in total born, but 9 kind of lived as adults and
had
their
their own
family.
Yeah.
And in those days, we wouldn't go down the supermarket and buy in the beer. We would go to a proper wholesale off license in the back of a pub or whatever, and we'd have crates of bottled Guinness and bottled lager, and that's what was served. And it was very much go on, have a bottle of Guinness, or have a short, have a little whiskey,
Yeah, and that would have been only really happen at Christmas.
Yeah.
So going down and getting those crates of beer was that was only a special part of Christmas.
So I knew that was one of the kind of things
rituals
that happened. The rituals. Yeah. I wouldn't say that food was essential. It was, and I don't mean to sound, kind of critical or too critical, because it was more of a functional thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis, it was more of a functional thing. Food was fuel. There was particular occasions where, like Christmas, for instance, where food was more of a central thing. Even then, my mum wasn't, a spectacular cook in any sense. So it was pretty regular fare. Yeah.
So how do you think your experiences, of eating when you were a child have kind of impacted on you now? Because it sounds quite traditional, oft repeated dinner time experience. Yeah,
I think, while it might not have been surrounded by culinary delights on a day-to-day basis, what actually it did do is it made us close. It made us sit down. Not made us, but we did. We sat down over the food that we shared, and we talked about stuff and talked about our days. And, I think that made kind of pretty solid foundations, particularly between me and my parents, but also other members of my family. I've been away for many, many years now, but I still have a connection that's there.
Yeah, so it's been a sort of
it's a foundation, really.
Or what sort of value do you place on what you eat on a sort of normal day nowadays? Is it...
Oh, quite a high value. Yeah. I suppose I've become more and more aware of, the benefits of eating a good, well-balanced diet. But also, my kids, in turn, bringing kind of, learning back to the table, so to speak, so that you become more and more aware of what is, I suppose, good and perceived as potentially bad for you.
So do you think youngsters today have a sort of healthier approach to food?
I think they're really tuned in now. By the same token, people today are bombarded with all of this, and it's hard.
And eating takeaway, obviously, is just a normal part of every week for lots of people. Whereas
you don't necessarily need to get out of bed, do you, to eat now?
No, that's true. If you had to describe yourself as an item of food, what would you choose?
Oh, that's an interesting one, isn't it?
Something sweet, something savoury?
A boiled egg.
Boiled egg. And why would that be?
Well, smooth on the outside, but when you crack the top, you're not quite sure whether, some days you might get a hard one, some days you might get a soft one, but if you add a little bit of salt, it'll be brilliant.
Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you. Now, Michael's going to rejoin me for the Nugget of Knowledge, the part of the show where we deep dive into a foodie topic. It could be the history of a food item, a trending piece of food news, or a current food trend, who knows? So, what are we discussing on this episode of Nugget of Knowledge, Michael?
Well, this time around, I thought we'd talk about vitamin D. The sun's just come out, and I think it's a topical point of discussion, really. Yeah, I think it'd be nice to know what the benefits are.
Well, it helps regulate the amount of calcium and phosphate in the body. These nutrients are needed to keep our bones, teeth and muscles healthy. And a lack of vitamin D can lead to bone deformities such as rickets in children and a condition called osteomalacia in adults, which is a disease that weakens bones and can cause them to break more easily. And I guess must be related to osteoporosis, which is something that a lot of elderly or older women suffer with. So it's an essential vitamin for human health. And I know that you are a big fan of the vitamin D supplement.
I am, yes. I do actually take a vitamin D supplement. I wouldn't say religiously, but, pretty regularly.
There are food options for increasing your level of vitamin D. One of them is good old oily fish.
I'm not a big fan of oily fish, as you may already know.
I do.
So for me, the supplement option is a reasonable one because I don't eat a lot of oily fish.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, you will be very pleased to know then about what I've discovered as a potential new source of vitamin D. Okay, and it would be the humble button mushroom. And I know you're a big fan of mushrooms.
I do like mushrooms.
Whilst thinking about vitamin D, I discovered that mushrooms have the potential to be the only non-animal, unfortified food source of vitamin D. And amazingly, a single serving, which is 100 grams, apparently about 3 mushrooms, provide you enough to meet the UK's daily recommended
Wow, that's impressive.
intake. So you might be interested to know a little bit of the science, okay? Mushrooms have high concentrations of something called ergosterol or
Sorry, say that again.
Spelled ERGOSTEROL.
Okay.
Ergosterol.
Or ergosterol?
One of those, anyway. In their cell walls.
Okay.
And when their cell walls are exposed to UV radiation, ergosterol becomes ergocalciferol, okay, which is commonly known as vitamin D. And in general, mushrooms in their production are not exposed to UV radiation. As you can imagine, most mushrooms are grown in dark conditions.
Right, okay.
And they're then harvested.
So does that mean that they lose their benefit then?
Absolutely. Well, they don't have sufficient in them to have the kind of maximum, recommended daily intake. So basically, bog standard mushrooms are grown in the dark, they're picked under a fluorescent light, and they're transported in refrigerated lorries, so they've got a very low vitamin D content. But in 2016, Tesco launched a range of vitamin D enhanced mushrooms, and they were actively exposed to UV radiation after picking and therefore had enhanced levels
Right, okay.
of the vitamin.
I just didn't know that. They've kept that very quiet.
They have kept it very quiet. And the weird thing was, when I searched online to find out which supermarkets stocked vitamin D enhanced mushrooms, there was nothing. You can't really tell whether your mushroom has or hasn't been enhanced.
Right.
All I could find was a news story about 2016 launch by Tesco's. And I also found one story that said that Sainsbury's sell them as well. But looking online at the supermarkets' online stores, there was nothing to indicate that their mushrooms had or did not have enhanced levels of vitamin D. So they're not shouting about it.
I find that incredible. Yeah, you think their marketing machines would get into gear on that one because everyone is going to be interested in this, aren't they? Well, maybe call me a vitamin D obsessive, but right. I find it particularly interesting. Yeah.
Well, let's say everyone should be interested in it.
To get down Tesco right now.
Yeah. So basically, if you want to be sure that your mushroom has been enhanced so that it's got more vitamin D, you have to check the labelling.
And what about mushrooms that are allowed to kind of roam freely?
Well, interestingly, I did read a report that seemed to imply that you can expose your mushrooms, yourself in the garden. So if you buy your mushrooms, you can put them in the sunshine for probably up to an hour or so before you cook with them.
Okay.
And that will increase, naturally the vitamin D level. But obviously that's not a practical option for most commercial
it's not really, is it?
sellers. So they tend to use like a UV pulse, which only takes a few seconds to, bring the vitamin D levels up to what they need to be.
So I suppose, would you recommend that people then expose their mushrooms at home?
Well, I would recommend it actually.
Only at home.
But maybe not in the garden. No. The other thing is to make sure, and you'll like this as well, because I know how fussy you are about best before dates and all that kind of stuff. You do need to eat them when they're fresh, and definitely before the best before date on the pack. Okay. Otherwise, the vitamin D level, assuming that they've been enhanced, will start to decline.
That's music to my ears.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. Mushrooms on toast for breakfast, anyone?
Well, I didn't know any of that. That's really fascinating, and I'm interested in exploring more about this.
Yeah, so next time we go shopping, we will be looking at the labels.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I'll see if I can do a recce of all the major supermarkets and see which ones are actually selling mushrooms and report back next episode.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely be looking at mushrooms in a different light.
So, brilliant. Before we go, I just wanted to flag up some of our favourite mushroom recipes.
Okay.
Mushroom stroganoff. Jamie Oliver's recipe with the splash of bourbon that you then set light to in the pan is delicious.
It's a bit of an event then as well.
Very exciting to make. Yeah, exactly. Mushroom soups, particularly in the winter time. Love that. Portobello mushrooms. Obviously, they're a great option for a veggie burger.
Yeah.
Ideal. Creamy mushroom and spinach pasta.
Yeah.
Haven't had that, but I thought it sounded quite nice. We might try that one.
It does sound nice, yeah.
And of course, our old favourite shop-bought mushroom stuffed ravioli, topped with quickly pan-fried mushrooms and sprinkled with Parmesan cheese.
That have been allowed to stand in the light for a bit.
Yeah, next time. Yeah, we will. We'll boost them. Okay, cool. That's this episode's nugget of knowledge. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And have a renewed respect for the humble mushroom.
Well, I'm off to get some mushrooms.
I know, but don't forget to check your labelling. Wow. Well, thanks for listening to the very first episode of the What's for Dinner show. It's been quite a journey for me conceiving and creating it, but hopefully it's a good listen. If you enjoyed it, why not check out my other episodes, available from whoever provides your podcasts. It's usually Apple, Spotify or Google, but other providers are out there. If you follow me, you'll be reminded to listen to future shows and you won't miss a thing. You can also like and follow the What's for Dinner show on Facebook or find me as Lynn's Food on Instagram. Thank you to my first ever guest, Michael O'Halloran, for his patience and his willingness to be the show's guinea pig. And a big shout out to Rick Simmons at Verboo for his advice and support. Once again, thank you for listening, and do please recommend the What's for Dinner show to your friends, your family, your work colleagues. Really, I'd love it if you told anyone and everyone. Those you bump into in the street, meet down the pub, sit next to on the bus. You get the idea.